So what before you started looking into this kind of area, then through the necessity of losing, was it your father or your grandfather?
My
Your
father.
father. What was your
Mhm.
position on life after death and that sort of thing at that point?
Hmm. I mean, I rarely thought about it just because it scared me so much. I mean, I thought it was pretty much as realistic as Santa Claus or the Tooth
Mm,
Fairy. It was just, it made absolutely no sense. I mean, I try to never know anything 100%. That's just part of my personality. I like, you know, to just kind of have a humbleness and realize that we can never always know everything. But I was pretty much 99.9% sure that there'd be no life after death. It made no sense.
mm,
Once your brain dies, how could you
mm,
continue? And also, I think most of the general mainstream conversation that we're exposed to about life after death, not to disrespect religion, but it kind of seems a little absurd. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people get a lot of comfort and love, and religion can have some beautiful things, but nothing about a heaven or any of that made any sense any more than
mm.
any other fantasy fable. So
Yeah.
I just never considered it.
Mm. And there are certainly, I found a lot of contradictions in, especially Christian religion, because I suppose being in the UK and you being in the US, that's the dominant religion around.
Well,
And I
my
was,
family's Jewish
uh,
actually, but culturally, I was raised in a pretty Jewish culture, but like very, very secular Jewish. Like,
right.
the Larry David style, like
Mm,
eat our bagels. But I don't think I really grew up around anyone who believed in God. If they did, they never talked about it.
mm. See, I was brought up in a Christian primary school or elementary school, it'd be for you.
Mm.
And we used to have to pray before every meal and every lesson and things like that. And it always seems so far removed from reality for me. We used to have assemblies where we'd have Bible readings and I was listening to it and I was thinking, but you're telling me that a guy had a big boat and he put every species of animal, two of each on there. That must have been a bloody big boat, And I just the stories that they said from the Bible just didn't make logical sense to me without invoking some sort of magic, and to me that wasn't a thing. But I suppose the thing with the Bible is, its original meaning after 2,000 years it's long since been removed and long since been misunderstood. So to me, taking anything from biblical texts as literal to me is just completely unfeasible now.
I agree. I mean, it didn't really seem different when I would learn the stories. And I guess my difference was I was never told they were true. I was just kind of taught them as history or fables, or, if I went to synagogue for someone's bar bat mitzvah, you'd hear the stories, but, it was never considered true.
Mm,
And it just never seemed any different than when I learned about, Zeus and the Greek gods. It
mm,
just all
mm.
seemed like myths and symbolism that
Yeah,
we used to try to explain, but not based on any reality.
no,
Never crossed my mind it would be. But it
no.
sounds like you were raised with the mindset that it was true, or
I
with your
was raised.
family, like your culture was.
My family were never religious. They were always not atheists, but just I didn't really think much of it. I suppose you could say they were agnostic. But the school was, yeah, very much this is true, and I could see the value in it metaphorically. Taking these stories as metaphors and as a learning or as a way of portraying teachings and ways to live. But literally, I couldn't see them as literally true, as you say. So it sounds like we had a very similar kind of background as children that we or as younger people that we didn't have any belief in anything. What was it that ultimately forced you to look into this? Was it immediately at the loss of your father, or was there any interest before that?
I mean, there was definitely a curiosity. I mean, we all have a significant amount at stake, and my dad had had me much later in life, so he was the age of my friend's grandparents.
Mm,
So it was something that always loomed over me, which is, I mean, I didn't really have realistic hope, but I think if I'd heard about the research that I found now, I would have been really intrigued. I just never heard anything logical. So it was actually when my dad went into hospice that I first began to think about this. And I guess my very first thought about it was, is there any way to turn back time? I mean, I know that sounds a little crazy. I didn't think I could just build a time machine in my
mm,
room the way you see in like sci-fi
mm,
movies, but my thought was, okay, so much of science fiction becomes true. And is it possible that in, say, 5,000 years, we'd be able to turn back time? So one day when I have children, maybe I could give them information on my dad and, like, you know, lineage and lineage down the
Mm,
line. So they could come back and like save him and medicine's better and we all live to 500. And it was more curiosity than and a hope that there was something more.
mm,
So my next step was I started reading more and more about time travel. And what I discovered, I was reading Time Travel in Einstein's Universe. And it absolutely is possible to time travel. It's not really practical. You know, we are physically too big. And if we tried to build a rocket that moved at that speed, we would probably die.
mm,
And we just don't have the technology or capabilities. But in theory, it's possible.
mm,
So that to me showed that what we perceive as all the limits of our material world and the laws of the universe are a lot more flexible, I guess, and there's a lot more possibilities than I'd originally thought. And that was the first thing that gave me hope.
mm. So
And then
is it possible then, from what you've read, to go backwards? Because I know it's possible to, I suppose, go forward in time or slow down time by approaching light speed or orbiting a black hole or something like that. But I never actually knew it was possible to go backwards if that is the case.
um, apparently it is. I have to reread it, but essentially, you know, I don't even want to be quoted on this because I don't remember all the science of it, but I think you would have to go faster than the speed of light because our memories and experiences are traveling at the speed of light imprinted in the light into
Mm,
outer
mm,
space. And if you were to go faster than that, which we obviously can't do, but still, then in theory, it
mm,
shows that there is time. Maybe if there's a species that one day can, or
mm.
then yes, you could go backwards in time. I believe there's, yeah. So someone, a definitely physicist, could explain this significantly better than I just did. But
Sure.
in theory,
In theory,
yes,
it's
which
possible.
just,
Mm.
yes.
So, yeah, I've never really gotten into the nature of time and all that sort of thing, but it is an interesting area. But very, as you say, very complicated stuff to understand from a lay perspective, without talking to physicists, and they're very difficult to get a hold of. Um,
Yes.
so once your father went into hospice, which is when you say you started looking at this subject, what was the first thing you started looking at? Was it a phenomena? Was it the nature, or was it philosophy? And what did you think about that?
So after reading about time travel, the very first thing that got me into afterlife was I had a thought, and it was about past lives. I mean, I don't like the word reincarnation because that brings way too much spirituality into it. But my immediate thought was at that time, I assumed consciousness was created by brain cells. So why could another physical body, you know, that accidentally created an experience of being a me, why could another body not go and do that in some other body down the line or in past history? It wouldn't have anything to do with karma or any form of spirituality, but just the dumb luck of brain cells creating a me. Why could that not happen again? That was my thought. And I knew that wouldn't mean I'd get to ever see my dad again, or that, you know, we'd be the same people or traveling down some consistent growing consciousness line. It would just be more evolutionary, random
Mm,
luck of being a consciousness again. But that was better than total obliteration. If you think there's only total obliteration, your standards are pretty low.
mm,
So then I just wondered if somehow in our DNA, are there ever any memories stored? And I Googled that, and that was the life changer because I found two child psychiatrists, Dr. Jim Tucker and Dr. Ian
mm-hmm,
Stevenson, and they are professors at University of Virginia. Dr. Ian Stevenson's passed away, and Dr. Tucker is his protege. And they were studying cases of kids with past life memories in a very logical, data-minded way. I mean, and I found an interview with Dr. Tucker on NPR, and I was like, okay, this is something to take a little seriously. And they didn't use words like karma. They didn't talk about anything like, when you think of reincarnation, nothing belief based. They just literally took cold hard facts and data, examining cases of kids with past life memories and matching them up with kids with a human who had died years ago. And the information they were getting was astounding. And I mean, I just basically holed up and read every single one of their books.
I think one of the most impressive cases I've heard was the kid. I mean, everyone talks about James Leininger and his memories, but the one that sticks out to me more is the child who said he was an extra in a movie in Hollywood.
Marty.
Yeah, and I saw on
Marty Martinson.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
and it was on. I saw it on Surviving Death as well, which we'll talk about. 'Cause I know you've looked at that. And it was it something like 50 facts matched up accurately?
Oh, it was some insane amount. I don't remember the exact number, but yeah, I remember just reading the list of that. And not only was it the facts, they met with, the children of Marty Martinson, now elderly, I believe women. I think they were daughters or a daughter, and they shared memories. Just like with the James Leininger. If your listeners don't know, should I explain a little what the case is about for your listeners? Well, first, the James Leininger, I'll do a shortened version, but Dr. Jim Tucker researched this. It was a young boy who started having memories and nightmares of being a World War II pilot and dying. And just after lots of research, it just, in this shocking way, matched up. I mean, to the point where he met with his army buddies, now old men, and he was a little boy, and they also shared memories. And the old army buddies, I think, were pretty convinced. And then similar with Marty Martinson, was an actor, was a young boy who started seeing, who I guess he had remembered this very wealthy Hollywood life, and turned out he was it a producer, an agent, I think, an agent as well as an extra in a movie. And he recognized himself from a photo in the movie of a completely unknown extra, and he recognized names of other people involved in it. And
I think that was the most impressive thing, that it was involving an extra who was relatively, completely unknown. It wasn't some famous stand-in actor or some well-known personality. It was someone effectively they'd pulled in from the street to work as an extra. And the facts that match up with that is something. It's like somebody trying to find information on your next door neighbour from a Google search. There's no way you'd be able to do that unless. And
before Google, so it's not like Google, you start going through and finding this man's Instagram. I guess he's been alive in the 40s or 50s.
Exactly. So you have to somehow get access to population information from the government or whatever. And why would you go through all that just for the sake of a potential past life case?
Right.
Not that you'd be allowed to do that anyway.
And he was 4.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And he was 4 years old, so I mean, or 3.
But yeah, the evidence for past lives is very compelling when you look into it. A lot of people dismiss it as not possible because, as you know, we know that the brain creates consciousness, and we know that memory is stored in the brain, and once you die, that's it. I mean, what's your thought generally on that view that's seen as fact in science?
I mean, I think we don't really know where consciousness is stored. It seems like our brains download consciousness from some cloud, or data bank. I mean, that's the question. What is the substance and how do we download it? But there is such a vast body of evidence that contradicts that our consciousness is created by our brain, and that's it. I mean, just all of the research that has been done that I've been studying, from mediumship to near-death experiences to past life memories, being done by university researchers. I mean, that's the stuff that just isn't really known. And it's absolutely impossible to get this information and have some of the phenomena that's been happening and then say it's consciousness is created only by the brain. I think it's something that's more complicated maybe than we understand.
Although there have been attempts, haven't there, to explain it in a physical sense, especially the near-death experience, because I suppose because it's the most popular, I suppose, in mainstream living, it's the most popular kind of phenomena amongst the media and things like that. That's been looked at more than any others, I think, in terms of trying to debunk it and trying to make it so that it's false memories, or that these experiences didn't take place when the brain wasn't working, or whatever else. I mean, how extensively have you looked into the near-death phenomena? Which cases have you seen and the research done?
I mean, I've read a lot of it. You know, Dr. Bruce Grayson, Penny Suntory, IONS, DOPS, Division of Perceptual Studies through University of Virginia. I haven't actually met with the scientists, but I've read tons about it. And I mean, my thoughts are, you know, first of all, I really believe in stepping down some to the experts who've dedicated their lives studying this. And every one of them who's studied it, they aren't necessarily saying, I know for a fact that we survive death, but they are saying that this is not made up. There's something going on. And I say that not based on, you know, the beauty of the experiences, which is certainly wonderful, but there's just facts. Like if you step away from all the emotions, there's absolutely inexplicable facts. They, you know, for example, will say they're out of their body and, you know, hear a conversation in a different floor of the hospital amongst their family and know things that just they couldn't have known. They'll see stuff, they'll know about conversations going on in the operating room or things the doctors did when they are completely unconscious. I think one of the most amazing that happens is, so a common thing is, you know, during near-death experiences, people will say they've met up with deceased loved ones. Some have come back with information the deceased loved one gave them that then proves to be true, that they couldn't have known, or they've met with someone who died who they didn't know died. I believe it was one of Dr. Bruce Grayson's studies or cases. There was, I guess, a young man who was being tended to by a young nurse. I mean, not someone you would think would die. It was her 21st birthday. And so this man dies physically, is brought back to life through technology. And he said when he died, he couldn't believe it. He saw the nurse and she said, tell my parents, thank you for the car, describe the car, and I'm so sorry. I mean, just
I'm sorry
so
I
sad.
trashed the car. Yeah.
Sorry, I crashed the car. And he was confused, and he came out of this and was like, oh, where's, you know, asked for the nurse and said, how weird. And, you know, he was blown away by this experience because it's apparently a very emotionally intense experience, but thought it was so odd he would, as he probably thought, dreamt about or fantasized or whatever about this nurse. And he found out she had died like that weekend that he had the near-death experience, and her parents had bought her the car he described, and she died crashing it in an accident on her 21st birthday. So that's just, I mean, and if that was an anomaly, I would say, well, you know, that's, you know, not enough to really, there's too many weird things around it to really know. But there's a vast body of similar stories.
There are.
It just kind of all comes
in their
together.
thousands as well. So what would you say to those who say, even though there are these high numbers, because the nature of them being cases, that it's anecdotal and it's not experimental science, so you can't use it as evidence?
I mean, I think anecdotal evidence is evidence. I mean, I think if we're trying to say it's fact and proof, you know, none of us can say this is proof, but saying it's a preponderance of evidence is pretty strong. I mean, yeah, anecdotal evidence is evidence, and you have to look some at the source, because in that sense you can say, well, what about all the religions who insist God is true? But they're not providing facts that are then backed up in medical communities.
I think that the common comparison is, well, there's also a lot of anecdotal evidence of alien abductions and things like that. So that's often used to discredit any form of anecdotal evidence for these kind of phenomena.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can't completely disregard any anecdotal evidence. I mean, maybe look into alien abductions. I'm not saying aliens are coming down and abducting people, but maybe that will prove to be some chemical of the brain that are making people fantasize this. I
Mm.
mean, yeah, I don't think people are being abducted by aliens. I mean, I haven't ever seen any evidence for it, but to me, that's different because it's not happening. There isn't verification at the
No,
next level of
there's
that.
no
And
empirical data you can work with. It's purely
yeah,
anecdotal. Yeah.
that's purely, yes. And this is happening in hospital settings with doctors who are verifying they're dead. Then they say information like, you know, again about the nurse or a conversation they heard their parents having in the next room. And then it's verified.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's anecdotal with another layer. And
Yeah, which to me takes it a little bit beyond anecdotal into empiricism. You know, I mean, books like The Self Does Not Die and things like that, which give these third party verifications and things like. I mean, Pam Reynolds, for instance, very well documented medical records to corroborate it, and you know things like that. But anyway, I suppose moving away from near death, because I've done near death experiences to death. That's all everybody ever wants to talk
no
about.
pun
Really.
intended.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you've done research into mediumship as well,
Mm-hmm.
and especially you've had reading. And we're again quite similar in that because we've both kind of looked at Julie Byshell, the Windbridge Institute, and had mediumship readings done ourselves to kind of get that first person experience. What's your thought on mediumship in general as an evidential base?
I'm pretty blown away by it. I think in one sense it's the phenomenon I know the most because it's one of the few I could actually go tangibly research myself. I can't, go ask Jim Tucker, can I come with
Mm.
him? I can't go travel around and research cases of kids with past life memories, but I could go get a medium reading. So, I, yeah, I've done a lot with that. My very first information about mediums, again, was came across Windbridge with Dr. Julie Beischel, and I was just blown away. I was like, there's something going on here. And well, I thought at least let me rephrase. There's a possibility that there's something going on here. This woman, if she's real, if it's true, that I mean, this is the most significant, mind-blowing thing that's ever possibly could be. And I started digging because I was like, well, is she a real person? I mean, this is how my skeptical brain went. I
Mm.
was like, what if there's one author who is writing a book as Julie Beischel and then
Mm.
writing books as mediums and pretending and just this really like one person or a little group and they run like a psychic hotline
Yeah.
really. And
Yeah.
so, and I dug further. That wasn't the case at
Mm.
all. And I decided to go get some medium readings and I took all the precautions and, I hid my identity. I, you know, had used friends, not family PayPal accounts or
Mm-hmm.
Venmo to pay. I mean, just every way you could hide your identity, I did. And not all of them, but a percent of them knew information about me that just they could not have known by normal means. And then, I mean, I was just like, is there some crazy like mafia, like medium mafia that is connected to the CIA and they're getting this insane amount of
Information through. Yeah.
information? Yeah, but so I dug further, and I mean, they knew things too that the CIA couldn't find about me, like memories I'd had with my
Mm.
dad. I mean, I don't think the CIA knows
How
something
to
like that. I
download
mean, if so,
memories.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And if they do, there you go. Consciousness isn't local if they can
Mm.
download memories from our
Exactly.
brains.
Mm.
And I then went further. I was like, I've got to see what is going on behind the scenes with this. And so I started volunteering with Forever Family Foundation. I got to know a lot of the mediums personally, learn more, and I the further I go with it, the more and more I'm absolutely convinced something real is going on with that
Mm.
mediumship.
Mm. So I suppose for those who are skeptical to the idea of going to mediums themselves from a subjective point of view, what would you say about the Windbridge Institute research and the papers written by Julie Byter? What would you say is compelling about those?
So much. First of all, they're peer reviewed, plenty of them. Some of them are up to quintuple blinded. They're not, they're being overseen by Julie Beischel. So it's not just someone going in vulnerably in grief, just desperate to believe. anything, which I think even the most logical person in a moment of weakness could believe even the fakest reading,
Mm.
especially, someone who's lost a child. So there there's so many controls. First of all, I could talk about this for hours, so cut me off if I go into too much. First of all, a lot of them are done on the phone, and I've had phone readings as well, and that eliminates cold reading because you can't see the person.
Mm.
Some of them, they can't give any vocal cues, even. They just have to hit a button for yes,
Mm-hmm.
no, maybe. Some of them, there's even a sitter in their place. Like, for example, Dr. Baisha will sit in place of a sitter and ask the sitter's deceased loved one to come in, and then the medium will give the information to Julie Beischel. And I mean, how is that cold reading?
Mm.
And it's so blinded that Julie Beischel doesn't even know which sitter she's sitting for. And that's part of it. I mean, just the level of blinding combined with some of my own experiences where they just absolutely knew things they could not have known about me. I mean, and just, yeah, I mean, this can't be faked. And from what I understand, I believe this was in one of Dr. Beishel's experiments. If not, it was somebody did. Sorry, I'll let the ambulances
That's all right.
pass.
No problem. I'm guessing you're in a city.
I'm in New York City,
Yeah, you're in New
and I
York.
live a block from the hospital and a block from the fire station.
Perfect.
So, yeah. Tell me, are you still picking them up? I assume you
Yeah,
are.
yeah,
They're a
it's
little
not a problem.
shaded. Okay,
Yeah, keep
can
going.
I
That's
start
fine.
going?
Mm.
Okay. From what I understand too, is that they asked, and again, I cannot remember which researcher this was, but they asked a fake stage medium, not one who was sleazy and deceptive, but
Mm.
one who does it for
Yeah, a
entertainment
mentalist.
purposes
Yeah.
at parties. Mentalist, that's the
Mm.
word. And they looked over and said there is absolutely no way they could do what these people have done. And
Mm.
and I've gotten to know mentalists personally, such as Lloyd Arbach, who
Mm-hmm.
backed that up, and he does a lot of work with mediums.
Mm. So I suppose the main rebuttal you'd have to something like mediumship, as always, would be, well, why didn't they win the James Randi challenge?
That was one of my main questions. I was like, this makes no sense. And I thought they would have. There's a lot of reasons for that. In fact, there is a book about that.
Mm-hmm. Randy's
And I
Prize.
can't remember the name. Randy's Prize,
Mm-hmm.
that's the book, yes. And they go into a lot more. So if any of you guys are curious, read this book. But I'll give from asking some of the mediums I knew. That was a question I asked them early on, and now I talk to them about it. They just didn't even know. They didn't pay attention. Most of them were like, why would I go to that? That was what some of them said. Another part is the way it's set up. It's set up to fail. They don't work with the mediums and how their abilities work. And apparently the mediums have to pay to go there. No reading is ever 100% accurate. So if they get one thing wrong, they fail. And then Randy will publicly shame them and say that they failed, and they're allowed to go say that. So you're just going in knowing you can't win. And, for example, if a medium was to give me a reading, which this actually has happened almost every single reading. So I'm an only child. Let's say a medium was like, I'm getting a father energy. You lost your father. I'm getting, why am I getting the word something about fire? Was he, this is the thing where they don't know everything exactly.
Mm.
Was he like a fireman or love something to do with fire? Something about fire and like the summer. We would spend all our summers on Fire Island, and then one said, he has your cat with him, the one who just died, the sweet one, and the cat that we always called the sweetest one had just died at that moment, unfortunately. So, and then just going on with more and more information. And then, they would say, and do you have a sister? And I don't. And then that's it. Randy would say they failed,
Mm.
no matter how much other stuff they got.
Yeah.
One even.
And I mean, I did a video recently, which I'll put up at some point, of I was reviewing mediumship readings that were done on the television, John Edward and all that, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I'm going to have an interview with John Edward at some point next year,
Oh, good
which will be
luck.
interesting.
I know that good.
Um,
Yeah.
and I was going through it, and you can see when misses come up that it's very easy to say, well, that's just a miss. You know, that's he's guessing something and it's gone wrong. But if you, and I've spoken to several mediums, and given your example of your father with fire, what the medium will get is a flash image of a flame, and that's about it. And now it's down to them to interpret what that means. Why they don't get the full message, I don't know. But they don't. They get them as symbols, and then you've got to interpret what that symbol is. So if you get a flame, how many different things could that mean? You know, did he die in a fire? Was he a fireman? Was fire a name of something? You know, so of course you're gonna find misses down to the interpretation, and if you use that as a way of telling that someone's fake, you know that you're not going to be accurate, because of course people are going to interpret things wrong.
Exactly. And as Dr. Julie Beischel said once, which mediums back up, it's more like playing charades than talking on the phone. I mean, if they could just give us a call and have a full conversation, I mean, we wouldn't be questioning this.
Yeah.
But it's interdimensional communication. And yeah, that's exactly with Randy. And sometimes I think, yeah, I've noticed a lot when mediums have gotten things wrong, they've taken something and overinterpreted it. Again, the fire. Because I'd said, you know, that like my favorite memories, one of them is Fire Island, and you know, bring that up for something, and then, you know, they're seeing a fire, and you know, they're not hearing the word
exactly.
Fire Island.
It could be just as we say, you know, it could be that something happened with fire. It could be the name of a street you grew up with the name Fire in it. You know, so it's down to the interpretation, and you know, there's no doubt Randy was damn good at exposing frauds, and he did very well with it. But when it comes to kind of scientific exploration, this sort of thing, a challenge like that isn't going to provide definitive evidence, even if there's a success, because people will believe that he's been fooled somehow, you know, and things like that. Not that, of course, anyone ever would pass it the way that it's set up.
I don't think it's possible to pass it. Yeah, I mean, I think mediumship would have to work differently than it does to pass it. And even then, I don't think even a phone conversation, like if you were to have a phone conversation and picture static and not the best connection, because again, this is interdimensional. Let's say you're calling someone on your phone from like an isolated island. The conversation's going to break up. Like two people on a static-y phone wouldn't pass Randy's test.
No, absolutely. Especially if that line is so flimsy that you're only catching a word here and there, and then you're having to interpret it, which is a good metaphor, I suppose. So we've done past lives briefly. I don't know enough about past lives to really go deeply into it. Near-death experiences, mediumship. What other phenomena have you looked at that made you convinced that this was possible?
Pretty convinced. 90%, 99 convinced. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not explained. I'm convinced that the laws of the universe are much more complex and layered and less material than we perceive, but I can't say no for a fact that means we survive death. I think we do, but I don't want to say factually.
That's the other thing I meant to bring up. I was going to say what other thing I couldn't remember, but there was one, Psi and your spoon bending.
That's actually, you said bring something up. I was going to go to spoon bending. Yeah, I have like two fascinating experiences with spoon bending, and that right there was so evidential to me. There's debate. People will say, well, that doesn't show that consciousness survives, and no, it's not proof, but it shows that our consciousness outside of a physical body can manipulate matter, and it shows that the factual laws of the universe, again, are not exactly how they are, and that phenomena that has been proven to be fake and a magic trick also is real. And so my experience with spin bending is twofold. First, I went to a medium workshop. Laura Lynn Jackson, who is Windbridge and Forever Family certified. And she was one of the first mediums I found. And so I went to this spin bending thing and I was like, this is, I'm curious because I'd been also taking Lloyd Arbach at the Ryan's class and he was talking about spin bending. And I was like, I don't really expect anything, but if I ever actually bent a spoon, that'd be pretty evidential. So about 2 days after that thought, after Lloyd's class, I end up at her workshop and she mentions we're going to be bending spoons. And I was like, oh, whatever, and I mean, pretty curious. Let's see if this is true. And it was so weird. First of all, I went with a friend of mine. He's a guy a lot bigger than me. I don't know how much you can see me, but I'm 5'4". I'm pretty small and not especially strong. He was like a very big, burly guy with a lot of strength. So we get our spoons and he cannot bend his. And I'm trying. I can't bend mine.
Physically.
And then it was just so physically, yeah. And it was so weird. Suddenly in it, I felt my hands get really, really hot and the spoon get really hot. And it was almost like not exactly a liquid, but like a melted, like set, like very soft, almost like as soft as a gum. And I could just bend the head right down and then it just cooled off and I couldn't move it again. And I was astounded. And then my really strong friend couldn't bend his at all. So that there showed that, that's strength. That was not strength.
No.
And
so what was it, kind of the general kind of rubbing of the spoon kind of thing, or was it just holding the spoon then it started to bend, or you were able to?
I was holding it. I don't remember if I rubbed it. If so, it was very gentle. I don't remember exactly what my hands did. I wish I did. I do remember the feeling of, sorry, my dog just almost knocked this over. Sorry, my screen shook.
What breed is he?
So he's a pug Chihuahua.
Oh, nice. You want me to Yeah, sure.
You want
we've got a little
I'll show you Pickles.
We've got a little puppy schnauzer. Oh, bless him.
This is Pickles. And then we can go back to spin bending. So I know it started where the whole class shouted bend at the spoon, and Lloyd later explained that just, you want to get everyone silly. So
yell at spoons.
And kind of fun, because that's fun, silly. Yeah, so you yell at spoons and you feel kind of stupid. And we all screamed like bend. And then the spoon, one part I do remember, I don't know if this would tie into it at all, but I looked over and I saw a few people really bending their spoons and I was shocked. And then it was like, I don't know if it was the shock of that, because I'll explain my second spoon bending experience after. And then I just remember, because I'd been trying and, I wasn't pushing it. I wasn't going to fight it. I was just like trying to very gently and nothing would happen. Then I did try like hard to see, just to prove like it was a real spoon. That was actually before we all shouted bend and played with it. And I did try to bend it using my strength and I couldn't do any of that. But then when this energy part, I didn't try any strength. It just like, it was so hot. That's the best way I can describe it. Like really, really hot without a different kind of heat than if you were to touch a stove. What was odd was it was probably about that hot without any burning at all or pain, if that makes any sense.
I was wondering, usually to have metal be molten enough to bend it needs to be pretty damn hot. You'd certainly blister your skin.
Yeah, and it felt, how it felt like it behaved. I don't know if you've ever soldered any metals, but like at my summer camp as a kid, we made these stained glass projects and would solder it and it would just bend. But like, you could not touch it. You would have been in the hospital and sent home if you touched it. But it felt like, in terms of behavior, it sort of behaved almost as if it was soldered. It felt like it didn't just flip itself while I was holding it just with my mind, but it was like it was a step away from that, and I just had to barely just push it very gently. Whereas before I was trying to bend it, and then there was my friend who was really strong and he couldn't bend his at all. And then I went to a second spoon bending workshop a few years later, which I think just added a layer of evidence. It was being run by Lloyd Arbach at Forever Family Foundation event. And I was in a room with a few mediums. I know one of them is one of our Forever Family Foundation ones, Janet Mayer, and there was a few others who were not part of Forever Family Foundation, but it was an event where one of the sections, some were for people who were having grief, and then some were for people who wanted to develop some of their own abilities. And it was a small group, and it was pretty much all like small women. I wouldn't say any of us were especially stronger than the other. And but of the group of maybe about five of us, I was, hello, there's my
Your cat
cat
as well.
Spot. Hi. Yeah, I was sticking his butt in the camera for everyone. Nice Kiwi. So sorry
That's
about that.
fun.
Um, so what was so interesting there, because some people will say, understandably, I would have questioned the same thing. Like, is there some substance, like trick substance
Mm.
they put on the spoons? So what was interesting, I was the only one without otherworldly abilities, as you'd say, or mediumship. And I kept trying to bend the spoons, and I could not bend them. And I kept passing them off to the mediums, like Janet Mayer and some of the others, and they were just bending them immediately. And I thought that was so interesting,
Mm.
because they were the same exact spoons that I couldn't. And I don't know how I was able to in Laura Lynn's and then not in Lloyd's. It might have been, I actually asked Lloyd, and we thought maybe, I don't really know, but I mean, I really probably needed to at Laura's. Like, I was in such a different psychological like space of desperation when I was there. And I don't know if, I can't begin to say why that would
Mm.
work versus,
Mm.
at Lloyd's, I was much further along. I'd already, been researching this for a couple of years. I was friends with all the people there. I mean, I don't think grief goes away, but it wasn't that early, raw grief for like every little thing that a medium would say was like, had carried
Yeah.
so much weight. Like, could this be true? And versus not, where, that
Yeah.
emotional
Where the biases
desperation
take over.
was gone.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, or just there wasn't the emotional desperation. Like early on when I was researching, like I absolutely, like I was hanging on every word that Laura said at that event, like hoping, could this be true? Like
Mm.
everything she's saying is carrying so much weight because Dr. Beishel's backing her up. And if, Dr. Beischel, and if, Dr. Beishel's not true, then there's no chance this is true. So like every little second of that day
I
carried
see.
like
Had extra
this
weight. Yeah.
desperation.
Mm.
Whereas at this one, like I was helping run the event because I helped Forever
Mm.
Family Foundation. I was seeing my friends. I was having fun. I wanted to bend a spoon because it's really scientifically interesting. But
So
my,
it seems as if the kind of having an emotional investment into it has an effect, which again it is kind of evidence against any kind of material thing, because it wouldn't make any difference. You wouldn't have thought.
yeah, I have no idea. That was
Mm.
just, I mean, that was just a
Yeah.
guess. I think there'd have to be a lot more tests to do that, done by different people. I mean, because I can't go back in time and unlearn everything
Mm.
and then test and have this desperation to do it. Um, that's just the stuff that's just purely
Yeah.
speculative.
I mean,
And I just thought it was interesting
it
that,
always will be speculative until we have a mechanism as to how, first of all, consciousness can exist without the brain. We're always going to rely on
right.
speculation. But then, we speculate as to how the brain can create consciousness anyway, because we don't have a mechanism for that either. But that's taken as true for some reason. So after having done the spoons yourself, someone's having a bad time in the traffic outside, aren't they?
It's just living in New
Yeah.
York next to a fire station and
Yeah,
hospital.
that's why I'm so
Sorry.
glad I live in the city, in the country. I couldn't live in a city or a town these days.
Oh my
God.
God. I don't even notice. I would have stopped. I grew
You
up
grew up
here,
there,
so I
yeah.
just, when I hear it, it's just I don't even
Mm.
process the noise in my
Mm.
brain. So
So after having done the spoons yourself, what do you think to those, like, I suppose going back to Randy again, those like oh, what's his name, Uri Geller, and folks like that who
Geller.
were very well evidenced to be using trickery to do the spoon bending, and folks like Darren Brown who can do this sort of thing and show the tricks involved. As someone who's done that without knowing tricks to do it and haven't actually experienced that bend yourself, what do you think to those kind of attempts to explain physically?
I think I'm going to just have to quote Lloyd Arbach on this. And he said, just because a phenomena can be faked doesn't mean that every single time it is. Otherwise, you'd never watch a movie. Everything's
Mm.
faked in that all the time. And I mean, I can only go with the facts. Like, yes, it's stage magic. and and it did happen to me, and it happened to other people that I absolutely
Mm.
trust and know. I mean, both are complete facts
Mm.
that I did it, and I saw other people do it with, who have mediumistic and energy abilities I don't have, with spoons that I can't bend. And I trust the people. I trust Lloyd with the spoons he provided. I trust Laura with the spoons she provided. I trust the Janet Mayer who I watched bend them. I trust, the other people
Mm.
in that room. There's just, it happened.
I mean, the only
I
kind of explanation I can think of that would, I mean, there's a difference between seeing someone on the television bending a spoon or even seeing someone in the same room as you bending a spoon, because the difference is when you're holding a spoon, you know there's nothing on your hands, you know there's nothing going on, the spoon isn't pre-bent because you haven't set anything up, so you know, and that's I suppose that's the difference with doing it yourself. But the only thing I can really think of is that to do it fakely or falsely, I suppose, would be to have some kind of chemical on that spoon that interacts with the salt or the electric field in your fingers, so that it heats itself up and becomes more malleable. But then, if you were in a in Lloyd's class where you weren't able to do that, but others were,
with the same exact
exactly,
spoons. That's the
yeah,
thing, because if I mean I 110% trust Laura and her complete honesty, but let's say, you didn't know her, that's exactly what I would have said. Oh, she put a substance on some of them, and
mm,
that's why you could do it. And, if I could have done the investigation perfectly, I would have like taken the spoon and had it investigated and had my hands tested, I just don't have that
mm,
kind of money or access.
mm,
But ideally, in a perfect world, but then, at the same time, I trust Lloyd as much as I do Laura, and I don't think he's putting any chemicals on. And then let's say I don't trust, let's say these were done by people I've never met or never trusted. I mean, and oh, and also I should say, when I first went to Laura's class and I did it, I didn't trust her at all. I was pretty sure she was faking things. This
mm.
is when I barely knew her. So, I just bring that up because people will say, oh, once someone's like tricked you, then you start blinding
Yeah,
yourself. I mean, I did not trust her at all when I went to that class. I mean, and yes, I have to be honest, I did trust Lloyd 3 years later or 2 years later in his workshop. But I mean, so takeaway, pretend I don't know who the people are, and it's random people who are like, you're going to a spin bending. So none of that explains, like, if the chemical was there, there's no reason that I could think of where, yeah, I could not bend the same exact spoon. And it's not like 5 minutes later, I then handed it to the mediums to bend it. It was like 2 seconds later,
mm,
there was a huge bag of
mm,
spoons, and I kept taking them out and trying and
yeah.
then just not being able to and passing them off to,
The only other really
I mean,
explanation you could have is that that spoon wasn't tampered with, that you couldn't bend, but the mediums that were doing it all the time had some sort of tricks up their sleeves so they could do it with any spoon. But then to me, with all the evidence of other psi phenomena and for non-local consciousness, you're now beginning to become much more unreasonable trying to make it fit into a physical paradigm than just admitting maybe there is something more that we don't understand.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I have to say, like, yeah, maybe, let's say these mediums, one, again, it's Janet Mayer, who in Lloyd's class, who I 100% trust. I mean, when did they go put this all in their hands,
Yeah.
and why? This was like a small little class of 5 of us. It wasn't being broadcast on any social
Mm.
media, really. I mean, I guess I'm the person who does social media for Forever Family, so I did put like one or two things, but I wasn't like, what, just what would have been the point if you're
Mm.
going to go do that? I mean, some of the mediums were also not part of Forever Family that were in the group. They were guests who
Pay to go
paid to
there.
go there
Mm.
to develop, and they wanted to develop their own skills. So why are they going to pay, stay in a hotel, take time out of their lives to trick me? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't seem. It seems completely ridiculous to do that, as you say.
Yeah.
What was the question I was going to ask?
Oh, I should add one more thing about spin bending. And Lloyd Arbach has explained that spoons, so they did a test with spoons or metals, and they had weightlifters bend the spoon using strength. And they had normal people like me who could not bend a spoon with strength, or maybe mediums with more guaranteed abilities bend it mentally. And then he sent it to a metallurgist, and the grain boundaries were different when the metallurgist examined them. The one who broke it, it just looked like there was a lot of tears, exactly how metal is supposed to behave. And then the other, it looked like they weren't broken. They were looked melted and stretched. And I thought that was, I mean, that's
It
evidence.
is.
And so I can say, if you're sitting here thinking I'm completely full of shit, try to bend a spin yourself in a group. You're not going to be able to do it by yourself. I never have been. I've only been able to do it that one time. Or go, take 2 spoons and take it to metallurgist yourself and see what they say.
Just try it. I mean, what have you got to lose? If it's bullshit and you already know it's bullshit, nothing will happen. But go and find out.
Yeah, or go to a spoon bending workshop, ask one of the people who bent one, ask a couple for their spoons, and then take them yourself, see what metallurgist says. I mean, that's something I'm actually considering trying to take some myself at some point and seeing what they say. So I'm curious.
So if there are mediums who are able to do this consistently, why do you think there's been no definitive experimental experiment done to show it?
That's such a good question. I mean, I have 2-part answer to that. One, I'm stumped. Why isn't there more of this? And 2, there are experiments, but they haven't made it mainstream. The scientists start to do it and they're pushed to the side. I mean, Lloyd Auerbach's a mentalist who knows stage magic, knows what tricks to look for, and has done some studies on this, and is convinced it's real. Dean Radin, if you look up Dr. Dean Radin and
Daryl Ben,
Daryl Ben, there's a lot of researchers. They're just pushed away from the mainstream. And also, I mean, I could see why. It's just not so much that they're pushed away, but why a lot of the mainstream just aren't. It would hurt their career. And also, people are busy. We can't do everything, like a scientist I absolutely love, for example, too, like Dr. Brian Greene or Dr. Lisa Randall, are both in the midst of studying string theory. I mean, you only have so many hours in a day and so much you want to invest in your expertise. I can't see them suddenly interrupting their day and saying, hey, let's check spin bending, especially it has so much stigma. I just think a lot of it doesn't really cross people's minds to try. And I would be curious, and that's just a very surface answer because I question it a lot myself too. And I always do wonder what would happen if you took a scientist of that caliber and showed them, look, this can happen. I suppose it would depend on the individual.
Yeah. I suppose one last question on spoon bending as well is, why spoons? Why not just rods of metal? I
have no idea.
It's always spoons, isn't it?
Good question. Yeah, spoons. I've seen it with forks at Lloyd's workshop. They had spoons and forks. They work the same.
Yeah, I've always just wondered why.
I don't know. They're probably easy.
Why they always use spoons. Irrelevant, but just
they're probably easier to get.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if I said, hey, can you go grab like a bag of rods of metal, where would you go?
Yeah, I suppose you can find them everywhere, can't you? But then again, it's always spoons. You very rarely do you see forks, knives, anything else. Don't know.
Yeah. I did see forks at Lloyd's. Yeah. I guess I have no idea.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Maybe if I've had Lloyd on, maybe if I can reach out to him, I'll ask him. So just a bit of trivia I'd be interested in finding out. So let's go on to Surviving Death, the Netflix series. Yes. The first episode, I mean, I did a review with Jan Holden and some skeptics on the whole series. We did a full review of it, and we all agreed that the first episode on near-death experiences was very good. The final episode on reincarnation was very good. The episodes on mediumship were terrible, evidently, I found. And you mentioned Laura Lynn Jackson. I don't know her, but from the first time I saw her was on that Surviving Death, and from my first look, I would say immediately she's fake. Just from the way that she behaved.
She's one of Laura Lynn. No, she's one of the ones that absolutely changed my mind. She is one of the best mediums I've ever seen. And I think that there was some editing that they did with that they didn't edit the hits, but I've seen her give readings. I mean, that just absolutely blew me away. Dr. Beischel stands by her. She's past forever family. I think I never knew she was actually absolutely stand by her. I
never knew she was actually certified with those institutes. But I was just saying, from the very limited amount that I saw of her on the Netflix series, just the way that she was very kind of flamboyant and very presentable, I suppose, to the person, and some of the hits, again, we don't know how it was edited, but to me, if I was to see that and stop there, I wouldn't think that she was genuine. But I haven't looked at her in terms of her other activities.
I have a hard time judging what I would have thought if I just saw her there
Because
because
you know her.
I know her
Mm.
work too well. And I think both personality wise, she's one of the most kind, genuine people. And I mean, she was one of the first ones I met when, I mean, I thought all of this was fraud. And so I was like convinced and looking, and she blew me away. She blew away Forever Family Foundation years before I got there.
Mm.
And Julie Beischel thinks very, Winbridge. I mean, you can't fake Forever Family certification. You
No,
can't fake
no.
Winbridge. And I've seen her just, I've been so astounded by the work I've seen her do that, I mean, she absolutely convinced me. I think Surviving Death, the mediumship ones,
I mean,
and the same with Sandra O'Hara has blown me away too. In that both Laura and Sandra, I think, are two of the best
mm,
mediums in the world, and they volunteer their time for science. Like, why would they do that?
yeah. And I
I
suppose we
think,
mustn't forget as well that since it's a Netflix series, entertainment was a big part of it, to get viewers in. So, of course, it would be edited more sympathetically towards what was emotionally triggering, I suppose, to people as opposed to the factual evidence behind it. So, I mean, I'll have to see if I can reach
yeah,
out to Laura Lynn and either have a reading from her myself or just ask her a few questions on what she's done. Because I say that Netflix series was the first and only time I've seen of her. So it wouldn't be fair to
yeah.
judge her based on
There's
that.
um, yeah. I mean, I again, like, I have a really hard time judging her or Sandra on that because know both of their
Mm,
work, and and I also know how editing behind the scenes works.
mm,
And I think I I mean, Laura Lynn's also, Leslie Keane, the
mm-hmm,
writer of Surviving Death, absolutely loves Laura and stands by her too. And Leslie's very logical, very
mm,
skeptical. She was, if you read Leslie's book Surviving Death, that the Netflix series was based on, you'll get a glimpse into the type of work Laura does. I mean,
mm,
Leslie Keane had tons of different readings and picked Laura and Sandra to be the two in her
mm.
book. So when you have edits, it's interesting. I think this almost should move more to conversation about the way editing is done with mediumship. You have the ones that have edited some um, movie stars, or not movie stars, celebrity
Mm.
mediums, and you watch the readings and they don't get anything ever wrong, which has never once happened. It's because they edit out the
Of course.
misses.
Mm.
And I feel Netflix, they edited, they wanted to, I think they wanted to make the medium ones vague because that's like, I don't know. That's maybe more the dialogue, but I
Yeah.
think,
I noticed that they focused more on the mediumship training courses and things like that, which was a big shame to me. Focus on the evidence.
yeah, I felt unfortunately a lot was left out. Like, they left out a lot about, some of the brain scans of mediums. It wasn't the most compelling. And also, they didn't really put protocols into place
No.
and there was a big emphasis on the physical medium, which I think, if I could guess, I think that set up the tone where then, you're, it sets up the tone for how you're going to perceive all the readings in it. And I think, yeah, I think, I think you can edit anything to make it perceive how you want to.
Mm.
And I think to have a physical medium and to have not have there just weren't controls. There should have been someone like Lloyd or
Mm.
someone who's a stage
Mm.
magician setting up controls, explaining how this phenomenon can be done, and then showing how it's blocked so the medium can't cheat. And then you
Yeah.
find out if they cheat or not.
Yeah.
And there just weren't,
Mm.
yeah.
And I think the way
But
that they portrayed the physical medium in terms of, I can't remember the name of the lady, the foreign, well, I'd say foreign, but then the European lady with the who had Tommy Boy and people like that. come through her. That to me just seemed ridiculous, and I suppose it would to
I've
anybody who'd first see that.
I w- I went to a physical medium
Mm.
seance once, twice actually. I went 2 nights, and it was a carnival.
A farce.
It wasn't even good stage
Yeah.
magic. Like I mean, I could go to a show by Lloyd that I would know would be stage magic, and it would be beautiful. I mean, I love
Mm.
stage magic, so would be really happy to have gone to a seance that I knew was fake.
Mm.
This, he was saying it was real, and it was like I've never seen such bad stage magic. I feel like it's something I would have like loved at 6 years old. It reminded me of like a child's birthday party,
Yeah.
except some of the jokes were a little,
Yeah.
adult,
Yeah.
but conceptually it was
It was, and I
ridiculous.
mean, the guy at the end was quite right when he said he was impressed with the information that came through, but then it turned out that everything was findable on the people's business Facebook page and things like that. Everything was sourceable, and it was a big shame that they focused a lot of time on that particular person. I mean, they mentioned, I can't remember the name of the guy, but an English guy who does physical mediumship and who has
Was it? Oh no, I don't
I can't
remember
remember.
who
But
actually. Yeah.
after seeing that, I contacted the guy, and if I can, I'm going to go and have a séance session with him.
Mm,
Sorry, Gary, Dr. Hadmas, if you're watching, I know you don't like this sort of thing, but I'd like to just to see, because I think there's
yeah.
no count, there's no comparison to going and finding out for yourself, doing these things yourself with a skeptical mindset.
Right.
But I just think it'd be interesting. I'm not one to believe in physical mediumship, but I think it'd be different if you go and witness it yourself. Especially things like when Leslie
Yeah.
mentioned the wax hand experiment and things like that.
Yeah. I would love to see Stuart Alexander. I mean, I've
That's
only
it.
heard really wonderful things about
Mm.
him. And I do think this is my personal take on physical mediumship as of now. I'm always open to being proven wrong, but my take is it's true. Unless you're a researcher, it's boring to go sit, because what I think genuine good physical mediumship would be like would be you'd sit for hours. You wouldn't get the average consumer, unfortunately, which is just so unethical. And I
Mm.
mean,
Especially for
I'm not
grieving
saying I agree
people.
with any of
Yeah.
this, but yeah, grieving, or I mean, and everyone's grieving in a way in life. Like we all know our own mortality and that our loved ones aren't immortal. So I think grief is embedded in part of the human experience in a certain way. So it's just, so I think physical mediumship, like it's psychokinesis, it's PK, mind's ability to affect matter. And maybe it's discarnate entities affecting it and downloading, maybe it's not. But I think genuine physical mediumship would be, let's say, I mean, you hear that it's the same people have to keep sitting in the circle day in and day out. But even if you took that away, if you were to get different attendees, you would sit. And maybe 3 hours later, like a really good medium could move, a marble across the room,
Mm.
and the temperature could drop and there could be a chill, and maybe you might hear one voice say one name in the air. And most people would probably not pay for that. So I think they make it entertainment, which I could just go,
Yeah.
that's
It's
horrible.
a
That
shame.
is
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
horrible.
And it's a difficult question, the moralities of mediums that are fake, or at least that maybe don't believe them, or believe themselves to be genuine, but are kind of subconsciously implementing these things. And you wonder, is it morally incorrect to give someone, if it's a false sense of comfort, but to give them some kind of closure, even though it's not true? Or is it
I
immoral to willfully lie to them? And it's a difficult one. It's a difficult thing to balance.
my personal opinion, it is difficult. And I actually tackled that a little in my book, but I really stand by don't lie to
Mm.
people. Like it doesn't do the
No.
phenomena any good. I mean, why lie to somebody?
Mm.
I mean, I can't think of any moral reason. Like if you're either tricking people as a medium, I don't think you're going into this being like, well, I don't believe any of this, but I'm going to give people love and comfort. Um,
No.
and they're going to pay me,
That's
you
it. It's the
know?
motivation
I
behind
mean,
it, isn't it? That's the real moral question there. Are you going in to provide comfort, knowing that it's not true, which is one argument that you could put, or are you going in it purely for financial gain? In which case, I would agree that that's not good, especially from the research
well,
point of view. It undermines all the actual research done on the phenomena.
well, there's a way. I mean, we all, in a way, have lied, I'm sure, at some point for comfort. Like, I mean, I don't think I run around lying to people, but okay, so before I believed all of this, and this is probably, I mean, this is the normal, I think, way you sort of lie, and a friend would have a loss and they'd be like, oh, I know like my grandmother's in heaven, I'll see them one day, you're comforting, you're like, oh, yes, and give them a hug at like the memorial. You're not like, well, I have never, there is no way,
Mm.
you've ever seen any evidence of
Yeah,
heaven,
yeah,
So I think it's not necessarily a lie, but but you can sort of expand your mind philosophically for a comfort and respect for another's beliefs. And that to me is the closest to lying. So someone, or, friends who said they believed in God in my life, and I know they've gotten comfort, and I wouldn't have turned to them and been like, well, that's just absurd. I would just
mm.
say, oh yeah,
Mm.
and that sounds really wonderful, So that's, to me, I think, as far, or, if they had asked me, do you like, what do you think happens after we die before all this? I would have said, I've never seen, I don't think there's probably anything, but maybe,
Mm.
even though I probably didn't think maybe.
Mm.
And that to me is how you lie for comfort. You don't have someone pay you.
No,
You don't
no.
go into like faking phenomenon. You maybe just don't contradict someone's hope and beliefs in their darkest days,
Yeah,
but you don't
that's it.
go make up a bunch of shit,
No, no.
know?
You don't do it for, as you say, you don't expect to be paid for it because that,
You don't expect to be
no,
paid.
no, that is the
And you
wrong way to
don't
do it.
fake it. You just don't contradict it,
Mm.
Like, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have just been like, absolutely, I don't believe in God, to like, or heaven, to a person who that's their core belief and someone just died like that day and I'm hugging them,
Yeah,
I would have
no.
been like, and they're like, I know God's with me. I'd be like, yes, I'm sure they are,
Mm. Mm.
and that's,
Mm.
even though that's as, and that's just more like, that's just
Yeah,
kindness,
it is compassion. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I suppose
yeah.
the last thing that I saw on your blog, which is important, is folks like uh, Dr. Bill Nye and Sean Carroll, who have said that there is strong evidence against any form of life after death, and that there's no evidence whatsoever for it in any science, and any science that says there is pseudoscience or woo-woo, which I hate the term woo-woo. What you wrote a blog post about that sort of idea, that sort of opinion. What would you say to those who follow that kind of reasoning?
I mean, I followed that. I think that's very logical. I think there is evidence that we just die in consciousness as part of the brain. But I think that part's correct. But I think there's also a vast body of evidence that there's something else too. And I actually think it's stronger. I would say, I mean, I think this conclude, if the choice is between religion, biblical Torah
Mm-hmm.
religion, or consciousness is part of a brain, I would say consciousness is made for a brain,
Yeah,
that's it.
definitely.
And that's a very logical conclusion based on what we experience here. And I would say if you are at all open, start reading, because there is a vast body of evidence. It's just, it hasn't gone very mainstream. But in in certain ways, it's like, how do you word things? Like, what if you see someone on YouTube who's like, there's multiple dimensions and we can travel through
Mm.
dimensions, and you'd be like, oh, whatever. They're,
Mm.
you know, and they're like wearing their tinfoil hat, and then you hear Brian Greene saying there's, is it a, I don't 11 dimensions of string theory, and there's someone saying the exact same thing except
Mm.
intelligently with evidence. So a lot of stuff, how is it presented? Who's presenting it? I just would say, like, look into it, but open-mindedly, and look into it slowly. Read.
Mm.
Um, I mean, just I, without a doubt, have seen evidence of it. I have met people who who I trust completely who've dug into this. I have befriended mediums where I completely trust them. And I'll add to that because some people say, oh, well, of course, now they're your friends, but I befriended them after having watched them. They weren't first my friends and then showed their phenomena. They showed their phenomena, and I was so blown away that I kept like going further and hanging around.
And even
I've gotten to know a few personally.
I suppose even if they were friends of yours beforehand, you wouldn't lapse any of your critical thinking on any of the readings done, because that's just part of you. And that's something that people that believe in this sort of thing are attacked on a lot, is critical thought skills. And people say that if you do believe in some sort of survival, then you must lack critical thinking, analytical skills, which isn't true. And
just completely not true.
Yeah.
I hear that. Yeah. And I think what some of the skeptics are, I've listened to some of the skeptical podcasts. I can't even think of a specific one now, or read some of the, articles, and they assume anyone who believes this has done no critical thinking. I've even read where they're like, I guess there was an expose, I forget which medium, where they went through Facebook and, they made like the fake Facebook profile, and then the medium did the reading. And they were like, see, they even do social media. Well, no shit, they did. Don't they think there's people who've thought of that, who do believe this? That's one of the reasons I do believe it, was that's exactly what I assumed they were doing. So I blocked all my identity. There was no way these people could know who I was.
No.
And
that's an important point, because people, when you quote or when you reference people like Dr. Grayson, Dr. Jan Holden, Lloyd Auerbach, and folks like that, Dr. Dean Radin, and you see them on forums, and they're all saying, yeah, well, it's confirmation bias, and they could have missed this, they could have, this is how the magic tricks could have been done. You think, well, don't you think that these scientific researchers haven't thought about this sort of thing, having been trained for their whole lives in a scientific way? Just because they disagree with your conclusion doesn't mean they don't understand science. They understand science better than you do.
Exactly. And then some of the skeptics, I'm not going to pretend I know science the level of a scientist, but some of the skeptics, who expose mediums, they assume that anyone who drew a different conclusion just isn't smart enough to block their social media. And I'm sure there's some that aren't, but it's this assumption that if you've come to a different conclusion, you're just an idiot and had nowhere near the intelligence they did. And
a lot of these people reference people like, it is unfortunate, but they reference people like, who are the popular scientists today? Michael Shermer, who's the guy, the astrophysicist?
Dr. Michio.
There's him, the black guy.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. I love him.
They quote him as he talks about when he dismisses near-death experiences and all that. The guy's an astrophysicist. He's not a consciousness philosopher. He's not a biologist. He's very, very good, very charismatic, and he knows what he's talking about in terms of physics and astrophysics. But don't look to him about near-death experiences, and don't take his word as gospel for that, because he's never looked at it. People like Bill Nye have never looked at it. He's a biologist. Is he a biologist?
I should know
he's never looked at but he's never looked at the literature in the depth that's necessary to understand it.
That's so true. They just haven't. What would happen if they went and really examined it? And that's exactly Dr. Beischel, a skeptical pharmacologist, was so blown away by her first reading. She went and examined it. And, I feel that, in a way, don't listen to anyone who hasn't examined something. And, listen to everybody in one sense, out of curiosity. And another thing I've noticed about skeptics, not necessarily scientists, but skeptics who, the Randy ilk, I don't know the debunkers now, including some that I think are very intelligent. A lot of them and actually every single one that I dug a little deeper, and I'm sure that doesn't mean every single one by any means, but even, Michael Shermer, who I love in many
Mm.
ways, and I have a second point about him I'll add in the end too. A lot of them came from a very
Yeah.
religious upbringing, and a lot of the trauma, and again, I don't want to knock religion. I do have some friends that are religious who just brings love and beauty, but it's belief based.
Mm.
And also, like anything, it can be used in a very controlling, traumatic way, laws that are
Mm.
passed and,
And
you
historically, it has
know,
done so more than any science, certainly. Mm.
yeah, yeah. So here they've escaped this, you know, very, non-evidential upbringing where, I would say most of them probably they were not taught God is real and God is love and loves you no matter what. They were probably taught this is God, you have to follow
Yeah.
XYZ
Yeah.
rules, and it's wrong to be this. So they escape and then they want to go debunk it. And they're very good debunkers. It's just they haven't delved in at the level of, a Dr. Julie Beischel or
Mm.
the founders of Forever
Yeah.
Family Foundation, and what would happen if they did, or Dr. Bruce
Exactly.
Grayson.
I suppose another
And
important point I mentioned about Neil deGrasse Tyson being a physicist, and don't take his word for it. But I suppose
mhm,
the truth is, it doesn't matter what background you have. What matters is, have you looked at the specific subject you're talking about? If you're you say about Julie Beischel being a pharmacologist, which has nothing to do with near-death experiences or mediumship, but she's actually done research in the field. So that's the person I'm looking towards more than Neil deGrasse Tyson, who, although he's a brilliant astrophysicist, has never looked at the research and just has an opinion based on what he believes is common sense.
that is a very
It
common sense.
is,
That is the
absolutely.
common sense conclusion, because this other body of research just
It's very
it hasn't
counterintuitive.
been brought to light.
Hmm.
It is very counterintuitive, and it's for some reason just not known at all. It's dismissed so quickly. And, this is 100% speculation, but I do, you know, believe in evolution in multiple ways, including just psychological survival instincts that we have. And if you look throughout history, yeah, like religion and again that horrible word woo woo, like all that stuff has been in so many ways detrimental
Hmm.
to our safety. There's sort of an instinctive survival to dismiss anything that might risk being pseudoscience or might risk being, you know, slightly out there, because it could be it's dangerous. So I just wonder how much of the instinct to dismiss things, all the way back to the history, back to burning witches. I mean, we have developed, we still hide from tigers. Our physiology still makes us run from tigers. So what type of physiological instincts to be afraid of a certain type of, spiritual over science, because it has been deadly, again, to witches, to dismissing medicine. I mean, it's just a theory of mine personally. I haven't read any studies on it, but it's just, I sometimes wonder if that could be part of the instinct of mainstream science, which is under such a threat, and a deadly threat, if that's not some innate survival instinct, the way we hide from tigers, or like logically we know how safe flying is, but like my body panics every time there's turbulence, even though I know exactly what's going on. It's
I
unnatural,
can't do planes. That's one of my big fears. I cannot do planes. But it's funny. For my 18th birthday, I went up and I flew a plane, a little
For
propeller thing. Yeah,
yourself.
and I was fine with that.
Oh,
And
have
I think it's
fun.
because I'm in control. I can feel what's going on. But just sitting on a Boeing 737 or something, I can't do it. I hate it.
Same. I mean, I do it all the time, but I get so scared. And I actually, this is my one little, like, maybe, like, I don't know if it's ridiculous. I have to email one of my medium friends every time, Joe Parada. I text him, I'm like, can I buy this flight? Can I go on this flight? He's like, yeah, Liz, you're fine. And there isn't even that strong of evidence of how well mediums predict future death, but it's like my own little, I'll say it's not the most scientific thing that I do, but it's just my own little comfort. I'm like, Joe, can I take this flight? He's like, yes, you can take that flight, Liz. And then
I can completely
Yeah,
sympathise with that
so
sort of thing. You know, part of my anxiety, my depression was a
yeah.
compulsive, obsessive compulsive thing where I had to do everything 3 times and in a certain order, knowing it was all bullshit and it made no difference, but you have to do it
Right.
anyway.
Yeah, there's some, it sounds like a miss. I mean, I'm not going to try to like be a doctor here for you, but yeah, it sounds like, as we all have, we know it logically, but our brains fire certain instincts that we have to do. And it's probably all based on bodies evolving to, our real only goals are to, survive and reproduce, and it's probably in the cities that we're not natural, or, modern society that we're not naturally made for. Our brains and bodies must give some weird signals,
And on that relationship with science and I suppose mysticism as well, there is a distinct risk there because things like faith healing, where people are telling you that God is going to repair you, Jesus is going to heal you, don't take this anti-cancer medication. That sort of thing is incredibly dangerous, very anti-science, and understandably,
Right.
from that you have this skepticism of anything apparently mystical or non-physical or whatever, which is a very reasonable risk. Folks like Peter Popov and folks like that who advocate this kind of thing that's clearly not the case. It's endangering people's lives. And so science sees anything like that as a
and
potential risk.
and there's a huge group of mediums, I would say, unfortunately, a very large percentage are, well, I think most mean to be genuine, but not all of them are as accurate. But there is still a big group that, yeah, claim to do medical intuitive work, and they're not telling the truth, and it's really dangerous. And yeah, I think maybe that's why there's such a knee-jerk reaction and refusal to dig further. Is it's almost like a survival instinct,
And things like
and
that, I'd always say to people, I don't believe in it, but if you believe in it, great, go for it. But don't substitute traditional medication and traditional therapies and do this instead. Go to your doctor first. Get yourself physically sorted out, and then if you think this is complementary, it's not medicine.
yeah, I would agree with you. And I think, I mean, yeah, the whole medicine's a whole other topic, but I do think also, especially in the United States, it's hard because it's become such a business, and the pharmaceutical companies have betrayed trust in so many ways. I don't know if you know about I believe it was the Sackler family, selling, billionaires selling and addictions, so I think it's, and the way insurance companies treat people here. I mean, it's much worse in the States with, people just not having fair and good access to medicine. And I think that ends up with a very unfortunate and understandable group mistrust, because you have people like Dr. Fauci, who, since the AIDS epidemic, I think happened before we were even born, he was there just working like crazy. But he's not one of the business people of the pharmaceutical companies. So then when something, I guess, I mean, this would be a whole other topic, but nothing's black and white, and there's good and evil, to get super philosophical and everything. And pharmaceutical companies have absolutely saved lives in the most miraculous, wonderful way, and destroyed lives in other ways, and through the business. And, so I think, unfortunately, there is a mistrust that make people not trust
Yeah,
medicine the way
and
they
that's
should, if that
most
makes sense.
prevalent in the modern day with COVID, especially. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a shame, but it's
It
just that
really
I
is.
suppose it's a part of human evolution that once we come out the other side, we'll look back and learn from it. Hopefully,
Mhm. We'll see. I hope so. I mean, I think, yeah, I hope we do. I think yeah, I guess I've been surprised at the level of reaction. So I just wouldn't have thought this many people, and, you know, I don't, this many people also who are taking advantage of and manipulating people and making them as you were saying, you were vaccine hesitant at first, and I don't blame anyone who is with a lot of the misinformation.
The funny thing is,
So,
I wouldn't have been vaccine hesitant, and if this guy hadn't have sent me this stuff, and then consequently I started looking into it and started thinking, Christ, maybe he's right. But if I hadn't have been, I mean, I'd looked into it and found it all to be nonsense anyway, especially the
yeah.
DNA manipulation nonsense. But if that information hadn't have been given to me, I wouldn't have thought twice about it because I trust the science and the consensus of science. But then I wonder, is that kind of a two-faced thing to say? Because I'm generally against the scientific consensus on consciousness and the fact that the brain creates it, or the belief that the brain creates it.
But they haven't studied. That's the difference is, people who've studied and dedicated their lives to infectious disease have come out with a vaccine. People who have dedicated their life even to just the brain and neuroscience, they haven't dedicated their life to studying all this. I would feel differently if the medical community or the scientists who insist none of this is true had deeply examined it. What they are examining is, we can only know so much. We're only at a certain level of understanding, just like, however many years ago we thought the earth was flat, which is a really logical conclusion if you don't have telescopes.
A lot of people
What?
do
Oh
still do
God,
think
yes.
that, unfortunately.
Which is crazy. Yeah, yeah. But I guess, I know that's another thing. But yeah, I guess I kind of see it as like the experience of being on the planet is one of being on a flat planet. You know what I mean? And then you have technology that now, I mean, it's overall for the majority of the people, it's very common knowledge now that we have a globe. But before planes, before
Especially seeing as we've
telescopes,
been to space and photographed the bloody thing.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Like, how much more evidence do you
I think
need?
the
But
main argument I have against because that's all I ever see on, well, I say YouTube debates. They're not debates; they're boxing matches. But all I ever see is consensus. The scientific consensus says this, therefore we should agree. We should believe that over these few scientists that have researched it. And my argument to that is, but of course the scientific consensus is against it because 90% of scientists in neuroscience and whatever have never looked at these anomalous experiences. They're more interested in neurophysiology and fMRI technology and how to cure stroke victims and things. They're not looking at anomalous experiences of consciousness.
they're not looking at it, no. And so they're making, and they know brilliant stuff that I don't. And they save people from brain cancer and strokes and just do remarkable work and fascinating work. But no, they have not studied this. And what they are making very logical conclusions about consciousness based on the information they have, and they have excellent information. But yeah, I would be curious what would happen if you took a brilliant neuroscientist who insists this isn't true and have them study this for a year. I mean, I guess you have to say right now it's the consensus, but there are neuroscientists who do study this.
Yeah, Peter Fenwick. Who else neuroscience wise? I know Peter Fenwick's a neurophysiologist. I know there are others. I can't think of their names now.
I'm blanking on the names too. Is Dr. Jeffrey Tarrant, is he a neuroscientist? I know he does interesting stuff, but I'm not sure if he's
I
actually a
haven't heard his name
neuroscientist.
before. I'm not sure, but I know
Okay.
Eben Alexander, neurosurgeon. But there are loads. Their names are
Yeah.
escaping, but there are a lot. Because I think
Yeah.
all the evidence I've seen, and I always say this, because I see the brain more as a filter or a receiver of consciousness.
It
Whether
seems
that
to be.
implied
Yeah.
dualism or panpsychism or whatever, I don't know, but that's just the way I see it. And all the evidence I've ever seen for the opposite, which, as you say, there is a lot of it, is more than sufficient evidence that can also be used for a filter idea, with the added extra that we've got anomalous experiences which can't be described by a causation relationship, but can by a filtration interpretation thing. And all the evidence is, all the evidence that's ever been given for consciousness and the brain is correlatory.
Right. I mean, where did I read somewhere that it's just as much a belief right now that consciousness is created by a brain as it is that it isn't. It's just there isn't evidence that it's created from a brain. There's no neuroscientist, no materialist scientist understands how this mass and matter creates consciousness. I have. I'm trying to remember specifically things he said. I know he's the one who describes the stream, and that our like all of our consciousness is part of a
Metaphysical
stream. But
idealism, which says that everything is mental and that physical matter is what the mind looks like from the view of three-dimensional matter or something like that. I mean, I butcher it every time, but he came up with a very good analogy of the brain, which is essentially a binary system. I imagine you know how the brain really works in terms of action potentials and things. Either a neuron fires or it doesn't, on off. Same as a CPU, a switch is on or a switch is off, and that's it. And he said, trying to fathom how a brain, which is non-conscious matter on or off, can give rise to consciousness is like trying to imagine a series of taps and pipes, with taps either being turned on or turned off, having it big enough and complex enough that suddenly that system of taps and pipes would become conscious. And that's essentially all the brain is.
That's so interesting. Well, yeah. And I guess when I think of that, like that explains how the brain sort of physically works. And all of it, I guess, this is where, you really have to, I guess, I don't know if this is more philosophy than evidence, but so the brain creates these complex conscious experiences. And in a way, I would have an easier time dismissing the evidence I've seen that consciousness is non-local if there wasn't the profundity, am I pronouncing it right? Profundity of emotions and love and anger and like such a rich other level experience to consciousness. If it was just, eat, survive. But if there wasn't this love, almost, and decisions we make that almost go against survival instinct purely based on emotion and love, it doesn't help us to care for a dog. Like, you know what I mean? How does that help us to feed and like pamper, a little dog, for example? And if there wasn't, there just seems to be something deeper to the whole experience of being alive, and that goes away from the evidence. But and then also we really do see how our brains and experiences filter things, because we already know there are colors on the UV spectrum that we don't see and sounds that we don't hear. And then different people, there's apparently these exceptional artists that have extra cones in their eye. Like I think it's 4 cones instead of 3, and they can see on the color spectrum. They tend to be artists, at least the article I read, because they can see color and layers of color on the spectrum that we can't see. And that just right there shows that our experiences are very filtered.
Yeah. And the thing is,
and not full reality.
When we say about things that are measurable and things that aren't, and things that are measurable are the only things that exist, we're saying that, we've deduced that from our limited experience of reality, and assuming that our limited experience of reality encompasses all of reality. Whereas, shrimps, for instance, as you say, see so many different colours in such more vivid detail than we do, certain species of shrimp.
Shrimps do?
I believe so, if I read that.
I had no idea. Oh my God, that's fascinating.
But, their experience of reality is so much, in terms of at least what they see, is so much vaster than ours. How do we know that they're not seeing more of reality than we are? We have the intelligence maybe to deduce things from it, but 99, I think the figure I had, I never know if it's accurate or not, but 99.95% of the universe is immeasurable.
Dark matter.
Not understandable. So how can we make any definite conclusions about reality from 0.005% of what we understand?
I agree. And also, you think we already see the limitation of a physical experience because there's already a contrast that's impossible that goes against this, if this makes sense. The concept of infinity. Infinity cannot exist in our world, and our brains can't wrap we can't wrap our minds around it. But infinity has to exist, because when did anything begin? I mean, sure, you can say the big crunch, I mean, the big bang, and things will end at the big crunch, but what about a trillion years, or, trillions and trillions and trillions of years before the big bang? Like, and what if you were to travel, at close to the speed of light for a trillion years in one direction? Like, so infinity has to exist in both time and space, and infinity does not exist and is absolutely incomprehensible in our experience, which already shows that this experience cannot be all of reality by any means. If one of the most obvious concepts that we know has to exist doesn't exist here. Does that
Yeah,
make
I know what
any
you mean.
sense?
I
You
do
know
know
what I
what you
mean?
mean. Yeah, it is. I mean, all this sort of stuff is unfathomable. Even trying to come to the idea that death is a cessation of consciousness forever. There, you're trying to interpret infinity and non-consciousness. I mean, not being conscious is an unfathomable idea to the human mind, because
It really
we're
is.
always just conscious. If we undergo surgery or we faint or whatever, we're conscious and then we're conscious again. We don't experience that moment of unconsciousness. So if death is permanent unconsciousness, that by definition can't exist.
That's, yeah. Yeah. And I guess I always go back to the first thing that made me consider reincarnation. I just don't understand why. Like, if you take the most materialist minded person, as I was when I first examined this, like, why is reincarnation so absurd? I mean, it can be quote unquote considered absurd once you bring in, the karma aspect of it, but just the pure, why could a mass of cells not create you again? Like, where you'd be a different person, but where you still just get to experience being, even if you like wipe out all Jim Tucker's research and, no valid existence of memories of past lives, all that's bunk. Yeah, let's say all that's bunk. I'm saying, let's say, I think like Randy, all that's bunk. That what part uh, of the laws of the most materialist minded neuroscientists would not allow for your consciousness to exist again as someone completely different, just by the dumb luck of brain cells creating a you again? It almost seems like it'd be a given that it would have to happen again.
I know what you mean. I
Does that make
often think the
sense?
same thing. If it's happened, if we go to nothing, we've come from nothing, apparently spontaneously as a species, as a being. We've come from nothing spontaneously. So if I'm going back into that same state of nothingness where I came from originally, why can't statistically it arrange itself in the same way again to allow?
Yeah, or even in a completely different way, but you still feel it, not as you as Darren, but you still have an experience of being a you,
And that's the
if
that's the
that makes
very
sense. And
difficult thing for materialism, is that sense of I, because that kind of, when people say the brain creates the mind and we know that the brain influences it, we know that because we know that if we, you can change someone's opinion of something by stimulating a certain part of the brain. But when we talk about consciousness, we're talking about that behind the mind, which is watching and observing the thoughts and the emotions. It's the experience of being something, or not even being something, but of being, of watching what's going on. And it's that sense of awareness that is behind all of that. Where does that come from? How can that arise from non-conscious matter? And it's the hard problem, which has been described so often.
hard, the hard problem of consciousness. Yeah, I mean, I guess I think in one sense, because, I still, because of my admiration of science and, however much I believe I've interpreted all the data I've experienced very neutrally, there's no way emotions aren't caught up in this. But even the most hardened scientists, there's always emotions about death, whatever your conclusion is. I mean, I think one of the things is just, it's so complicated, and so our world's so complex. And again, you brought up dark matter. I mean, just anyone who claims that they know the answer to something like that, that you just have to, that's just belief, the same way religion is. Someone who would just say, I know for a fact how consciousness works in the brain and that it can't work this way. I mean, that comes into belief. And and I just went back to, you were saying, like, why aren't there any brilliant scientists who believe this, who are more famous? But there actually are. oh God, Dr. Robert Lanza, what's the how am I
Penrose and
Penrose
Hammeroff.
and microtube, yeah, Hemorrhoff, the microtubulars, yeah. So there really are. It's just they're kind of pushed a little to the side, or I mean, those scientists aren't even pushed to the side. They're all very admired. It's just that part of their work isn't really discussed that much in
And I
mainstream.
suppose they risk their whole careers as well by losing any kind of credibility of the scientific population for believing things like that, which is a shame.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you ever saw this YouTube, and I have to rewatch it. I don't even understand fully what he means. But did you ever watch Dr. Stephen Hawking talking about shadow people? It's so interesting. And he talks about how there's brain layers, not brain in our mind, but brain spelled BRANE. And I guarantee I'm not going to get this completely right, so I'm just going to give the concept. But basically, like a brain is sort of like a flat layer, and either our universe or galaxy or something or dimension is laying essentially in one brain. And then there's others. It almost sounds maybe like a combination of a type of string theory, and you'll see reflections from other dimensions onto ours, and that's shadow people. And this was Stephen Hawking, and
And that would also, I suppose, give some sort of credibility to the ideas of who's the guy that says everyone's controlled by reptilians?
oh god, that sounds a little nuts to me.
I can't remember, but he's
I don't know who said that.
well known for saying that the Queen and the higher ups are all controlled by lizards and things like that. And it sounds absurd, but I suppose if you start to think of these different brains or different planes of existence leaking over, no, we don't know what inhabits that sort of realm, and what maybe that's down to what these alien invasions or these alien abductions and things like that are down to. Maybe it's these entities from different planes of existence leaking over into ours and communicating in that way. I don't know, but it really does open up a lot of things to question.
Really does. I think sometimes one thing that maybe can harm the credibility of afterlife research, is a lot of things are philosophy and not mind games and like the playing with people, but you know what I mean, like brain games maybe, and just pure philosophy that suddenly someone tries to claim as fact. Like, you can play, how do we know we're not in a video simulation? And that's fascinating to go down. And, I think we both, talked about Dr. Michio Kaku. And I mean, someone like him, and discusses that. And it's just these fascinating philosophical discussions, or how do you know you're not the only person in the world and you're imagining everything around you, the matrix theory. And all those are wonderful philosophically. And I think they're all worth like just the mind game of pretending they're true with yourself for an hour and seeing where your mind goes. And I think there's a lot of loss of credibility when someone plays with those ideas and then it's interpreted as they're saying, okay, this is fact, I figured out this is true. And I think that's maybe what has become a major, unfortunately, like discredit to some of the afterlife research, because you'll go with the facts and then somebody, whether, will kind of take almost like, I don't want to even say as extreme as cult-like, but that sort of mindset will be like, oh, because of this, then there's this whole, they say they take it 3 steps further than we have any evidence for. And instead of saying this is a theory, they're like, this is how it is. And then, that also has to, in a way, prey a little on vulnerable, frightened people, which all of us are in certain ways. We've all had trauma, we've all had tragedies, or and I also think some of it, a discredit sometimes of the anecdotal evidence or experiential evidence is in the wording. Like I was reading in one book, I forget which, and this is also, I try to stick with factual, experiential when I talk about my experiences in my research and when I write. And, let's say two people, let's say I had the exact same experience, or you had the exact same experience as someone who's been raised much more spiritual or religious. And like I guess you were raised somewhat religious, but you know what I mean. And so, let's say like I've taken some out of body workshops and I've had some interesting experiences. So I'll take it like more extreme than I've actually ever had. But let's, say someone felt themselves like, this is partially true, but I'm going a little further to experiences I know others have had that I haven't had it this big. Let's say you're feeling like, I started doing the exercise. I always feel like these really intense vibrations going through me and kind of lose a sense of time. And then I've heard of some people kind of feel like they're out and floating above and they've seen kind of this like energy like coming towards them and sending them information. So you can take that experience and word it two different ways. One person could say, I felt these inexplicable vibrations going through my body. It kind of felt like these hot waves. And then I felt as if all I can say is the sensations were above. And I saw something that I can only describe as light kind of sending information. It felt like love, and it felt like, some information, whatever. And then you take someone else and they're like, oh my God, I floated up and an angel was there. And, that's just based on sort of a lot of the language and upbringing. And I think having the limited language we have for it and people bringing a more spiritual talk to it can damage credibility with like the scientific community and being taken as seriously as it should.
We've seen that sort of thing with near-death experiences, because we know that many near-death experiences are culturally based on the way that they're experienced. Mm-hmm. People will see Jesus, people will see a Hindu deity, people will see just a spiritual being if they're atheists, and then they go off to this heaven-like environment depending on what their religion says they should be. And that brings, as you say, a lot of discredit in the scientific community, because they believe that therefore it's all created in the mind. Whereas I would argue it's influenced by the mind, certainly, and by the expectations, and kind of tailored to each person. Doesn't necessarily follow that it's created by the mind as a hallucination. But that's, I suppose, again, down to the way that these experiences are interpreted by the person that has them.
But what made me feel, I don't even want to say made me feel better, because it sounds like I'm like talking myself into things, but factually this was my thought process too, is this is getting into other dimensional. And we just experienced this in the material world. Take 10 different people from different cultures, have them all, they're going to Thailand. That's it. That's the thing. Go to Thailand. They have different socioeconomic abilities, so there'll be some more of a strain on others. They have different interests, different familiarity with the language, the culture. They all go, and each one would come back with a completely different story and completely different interpretation and completely different experience, not only of the facts. They would notice different things, they would eat different things, even if they went to the exact same place. Let's say you put them all in an island together for like a week, they would each say something completely different. And then when you talked about the emotions of it, they would, depending how people view the world, like some people have very dark views of the world, and they'd be like, oh, all these people were cliquey and not nice. It was such a bad experience. It was a horrible group. Like that's, they're just people who are negative. And then you take someone who's really like warm and loving, they'd be like, it was amazing. It was the people were so kind and I learned so much from them, and you would just, and that's just something so basic as like a piece of land with other humans or animals on our planet. And you would just,
and the experience is so different.
There would be very little overlap. So different.